Hi property people, thanks for joining us today. As always, we will be sharing ideas, experiences, problems and solutions for property people like you. Our interviews will get you to know some of the most active professionals in the industry that have achieved some pretty impressive stuff. Hearing about their successes, failures, strategies and insights, we really hope you enjoy. Hi property people, just spent an hour with Jack Jiggens, a young property developer, really cool guy, really nice approach to property investment, development, massively experienced and working on some really interesting projects where he's very open about the numbers and how he goes about building relationships with landowners. So I hope you enjoy. And please do like, subscribe, and share and comment. The more interaction we have, the bigger this grows and the more places we go together. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Property People. Today, I'm joined with Jack Jiggens. Jack has become well known in the property investment and development arena, having been in property development for over 8 years. He's done commercial conversions, HMOs, new builds, creative deals from assisted sales and joint ventures through to securing funding via crowdfunding platforms. And I remember actually the first time that we met, I was sitting next to you at a dinner where the late Tony Pidgley was doing a keynote. And I've seen you do some really cool stuff since then. So thank you for joining us today, Jack.
Thanks very much for having me, Sam. I remember that first time as well. It was a decent dinner, really good talk, but the company was my favourite.
Yeah, good man. Well, you always remember your first time. Jack, I want to always start actually from the very beginning. I want to know, who were you at school when you were young? Did you always dream of being in property? Was that who you were? What kind of kid were you?
Yeah, really good question, actually. I suppose, so going back to quite a young age, my dad was a builder through and through. He left school early. Didn't have any qualifications. He pretty much didn't get on very well at school. Became a very hands-on bloke, pretty much a bricklayer to start, and then started winning big contracts in London, and that was his gig, really. So from a very young age, I can remember him as a builder. And the most important thing, which is probably ingrained in me, is every house I've ever lived in as a child, he had built or he had bought. We had lived in the garden in a static caravan, and he had developed the property. So we live in South Oxfordshire. So unbeknown to him, he wasn't just getting paid for the value he was creating with the properties, but he was also getting paid for the really high pound per square foot values because it's a really desirable area to live in. So from like preschool, I was in and out of new houses and living on building sites. And my mum reconciles a memory where she couldn't find me one day, and apparently I was up on the 3rd floor of a scaffold with a cigarette butt in my mouth at the age of 6 years old. So it was almost inevitable that eventually I was going to be in property. And I suppose I could thank my father for that, but what I can't thank my father for is what it took me so long to get into it. So as a kid, he always said to me, use your head and not your hands. He had a hard career and was successful, but it was a long time coming. So I had it ingrained in me from a young child, sort of sapping what the elders are saying to me. How can you be successful? And I was always focused on trying to be successful with my head. But my issue was I didn't know how to unlock that part of my head. So in school, I had a really bad attention span. I don't enjoy things that I'm not great at. I have a really short fuse for doing things that just isn't my gig. So school wasn't academically that great for me as a kid. I was always more interested in being outside and playing around and playing sport. I was really fortunate to go to a very heavily sports influenced school. So we were doing 2 hours of sport a day, and it was great.
Wow.
But the academic side didn't necessarily pick up so much, just because my attention span was like 12 minutes at best. if I'm not interested in it. So, but managed to get through school and went to university. And I suppose you could say I really flourished outside of education. I managed to get through. I'm one of those things, if you start it, you might as well finish it. So I managed to finish university with a good degree in business and marketing. But I enjoyed the time away from the education more than I enjoyed the education. And then inevitably ended up, doing something completely different to my degree, I suppose.
Very, very interesting. So, just out of curiosity, actually, in terms of the sports, what sports were you doing? Were you like athletics or?
I predominantly rugby, but pretty much any sport that you can turn your hand to, I enjoy. I was probably most gifted at football, funny enough, but I enjoyed playing rugby most out of anything.
And do you still do athletic sports? Do you still keep fit? Because I've been reading this book recently about habits of highly productive people, and the more and more I read about like these very successful people, that they do actually pay a lot of attention to a healthy body to have that healthy mindset. Is that something that you kind of subscribe to?
Yeah, I still love fitness. I'm a bit of a routine and fitness fanatic. When I was studying at university, rather than go to like a pure gym or mainline gym, we actually went to, because I studied at Oxford Brookes, but me and a friend of mine, well, my housemate, we went to Oxford Powerlifting gym, and we joined a powerlifting gym, and the Oxford grads would go there, and they were like the most educated and intricate people at powerlifting. So I got very into powerlifting, and now I've sort of adapted that into what fits for my lifestyle, because powerlifting is quite time consuming, and I now do predominantly sort of mobility weightlifting. I still dabble from time to time, seeing what I can do from a powerlifting perspective. So it's body weight versus what you can do. So pretty much just the standard person's form of weightlifting, but adapted sometimes to powerlifting.
Very good. And then, so in first steps into property development. So you said your dad was on site mainly, and all of this powerlifting. Were you lifting heavy bricks, at the age of 18, 21? Because you said you wanted to use your head. How did you make that transition to think, right, I don't want to pick up these bricks here. I want to be able to pick up a pen and then go and do it differently. What steps did you take? Because you obviously did a business and marketing degree. Did that help in any way?
No, I think the most important thing that came from university for me was I aged quite a lot. I matured, and I understood what I wanted, and that took a while for me. If you look at my father or other people that are a generation above us, they know what they want or do when they're 16. I still wasn't there. I was sort of dabbling in a few things. And I had a stigma to just look at myself and say, it's got to get worse before it gets better. And in my instance, it was getting on site. So while we're on topic, when I was at university, I worked in the holidays as almost like a site manager / labourer for a ground contractors and an events company. Right. They're the same company. They set up an event that's on their grounds, but they're a grounds company basically. And I was one of the youngest there, one of the highest paid, and I worked the longest hours. And during the summer so from my second year of university to my last year, my third year, I earned more just on an hourly rate in that summer than I would have if I'd have taken a grad scheme. So in that 3.5 months, it completely put me off going to the city and getting a job for someone. At that time, Johnson & Johnson, all of the standard big media companies and retail companies were looking for marketing interns. It just put me off. I was like, well, why would I travel into London every day busting my balls when I could just stay in my hometown and double what I could there in a year? And that's when my mindset changed. And coincidentally, I went into an office sales role, because I knew I was gifted at hard work. I knew I could do that. I wasn't necessarily that smart at that moment in time. Very much a hard worker and not working very smart. And I took on a sales role because I thought, if I'm the hardest worker in the room, I'm going to be the richest in the room. And then I can choose what I want to do and what I'm more passionate about later on in life when money isn't the main priority. After a 2-year battle with that, I realised that you also need to be skilled at sales, convincing people, managing a process. So I learned a hell of a lot in that sales position. I suppose that even though it was 2 years of my life, it was a very fast learning curve for me. The way I like to explain it is being thrown in a room of 90 salespeople. It's pretty fast paced. It's pretty banter heavy. It is all about money. If your board doesn't say you're doing well, you're not doing well. No one cares about anything else. So everything else goes out of the window. So no matter how much you train, or you look good, or you take care of yourself, or you enjoy yourself at the weekends, that means nothing as soon as you step into that office. It's leave your ego at the door, and you are what you say on that board. So that taught me a lot, and I learned a lot of organisation skills, a lot of people management. I earned okay money in commission, but realistically on the side, I was always had something to do with property. I was always upselling an individual into a site where they were gardening for 6 weeks over summer, and I was charging a day rate, and I was paying them less. So I was always doing bits and bobs on the side. I suppose you could call it a born entrepreneur. And we've basically parked probably 6 business ideas that I've already tried to explore and deliver prerequisite to this point. But anyway, it got to the point where I never wanted to leave that role, because you only get paid your commission once you stay at that business. So it was a recruitment business. So once the candidate starts, you normally get paid 3 months thereafter that candidate starts. So you're in this trap where you're reluctant to leave because you've made that commission. You don't want to leave. I then fell ill with a ruptured appendicitis. And it was really that point when I was in hospital for a little while. And after it, I just needed to clear my head. So I went away on holiday with a friend. And it was when I stepped out of what I was doing that I realized this isn't for me. I want to be the business owner. I don't want to be on the sales floor. I could be doing this for a while, and I think eventually it would click and I would get the hang of it, and all my hard work and time would pay off, but that's not for me. I saw a lot of seniors, directors that were in their 40s, and they're still doing the same shit 20 years later. And that's not what I want to do. So I think 2 days after I got back from that trip, I handed in my notice, and I basically said, I want to leave. I think I said something along the lines of my director, I want to be you, when I left, which could come across as arrogant, but it was just, I knew I was wasted in that particular position, and there's a lot more better suited people for that role than me. So I left, and that afternoon, my dad was still doing what he does. I was up a tree with a 16-inch chainsaw in the rain with no safety kit on, chopping down a silver birch tree in a garden, and that was it really. I didn't look back. So I went from being this office guy that bought new brogues and was had a uniform to just doing what I wanted to do, and it was refreshing. It was a weight off my shoulders, and it got to a point where I was prepared to take that step back and be back on site to know where I was going. So that particular project was quite exciting. It was a joint venture between my dad and his buddy. They had bought a bungalow for 400 grand. Nice. I've always had a head for like seeing these things and recognizing what they're doing and why they're doing it, and spotting these opportunities. And I basically just started on site. And I remember a week later, after I quit my job, my dad's buddy, who is hands-on, and we're physically, knocking down this house and taking down trees and starting fires and all manly stuff. He said to me, so what are you going to do? And I was like, well, I don't really know yet. I've got X amount in my bank account. And he almost like fell off his ladder. He was like, really? And I was like, yeah, I've just been saving for a while. I've been working hard. I just been keeping it there because I know that I'm going to start a business. I just don't know what it is. And he said, well, why don't you chuck cash into this? And they were very sort of, they had the capital there, and they were very sort of flexible. So basically a week later, I was not only sweat equity, but an investor in this particular project. Nice. And it wasn't like preempted. It just happened. But that project was the biggest learning curve for me in property. So my dad's buddy, he's basically a builder, through and through builder. So we built this 1,800 square foot house. We knocked down the bungalow completely and built this 1,800 square foot house from scratch. The only two other contractors we had in was a plumber and an electrician. Everything else we did. So I had to learn everything else. So that started with demolishing the building. I was then probably the highest qualified hod carrier carrying bricks for about 6 weeks while the block work and brickwork was going up, which was interesting. So for those of you that don't know what a hod carrier is, it's the person that knocks up the cement and carries and lays out all the block work. So we had 14 ton of blocks that I was laying out on a daily basis for months and months, and basically being a slave to the bricklayers who aren't nice people to work with. But then did some brickwork ourselves, did some groundwork, did some initial landscaping, did all the footings, we cut the whole roof ourselves. So I learned a lot there. We slated the whole roof ourselves, all with valleys, gutters, soffits, fascia boards, and we basically did the whole house inside out. And it got to a point where it was like, I hated my life 1 week, then I was doing a job where I loved it, and then I went back to hating a job. And I suppose you form to a job a bit more that you love, and I did enjoy carpentry more than anything else. A year later, we had finished the project. So to run the numbers, because I know this is for property people, it was purchased at 400k. We basically built just shy of an 1,800 square foot 4-bedroom family home, including landscaping. We spent 200k plus mine and Matt's sweat equity, so you could argue it could be 250 grand, and it was valued at 1.1 once we had finished. So huge margin in that scheme. And it was all privately funded, so no cost of capital other than what you could assume yourself. So it's a lovely scheme to be part of, and that sort of spitballed and projected what I then did over the next few years, which was many more projects with the same team. My dad was never on site or never really part of the initial schemes. It was just me and Matt having a bit of fun every day and building out schemes. We work to a fast pace, and we know that once it's finished, you get paid. So we swallowed quite a few schemes in the next few years, quite a few big or small projects, however you want to see it. The biggest sold for 1.45, which was a big detached family home near Marlow, which is in Buckinghamshire, which we joint venture with a homeowner on. But there was quite a few other interesting projects, and that's how I entered into the property world, I suppose, so to speak.
That's very, very interesting. And I think the fact that you've got that experience has helped you to get to where you've got to now. And then you bumped into Ben Richards. And how did EXP start?
Yeah, completely. So after doing multiple Oxfordshire flips, every project I'd look at Matt, who was mid-50s, and he'd hit his head on the end of a rafter and swear, and I'd think, I don't want to be doing that when I'm 55. So I started then doing a lot of textbook work, a lot of homework, watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, really being pretty out there and, attending 3 networking events a week at least, having at least 5 meetings a week, doing loads of viewings, meeting with agents, just educating myself, trying to make those mistakes to educate myself. Had a mentor, and basically just tried to become a bit of a sponge to become a business owner or a property developer, more so than what I would like to call, you hear the phrase all the time, an accidental landlord. I called me and Matt accidental developers. We were just the guys that bought a property, did it up, and then sold it. So in my opinion, there was no business plan. There was no end of year accounts. It was just, that one looks grotty. Let's do that one up and put a new, completely new kitchen and bathroom in it. So I wanted to take myself away from a professional outfit, from the accidental developer, which I think there's still quite a few accidental developers out there. And I believe I've coded that name, because I've never heard it before. And I was like, yeah, that is what we were. So after educating myself and getting out there, and I actually took a step away from flipping houses with Matt, I took on a a project management contract in West London for a local business that's in my hometown, and we delivered a 70,000 square foot, £7.5 million spend office refit. And in that period, I was in and out of London. I had a lot of downtime, which you don't on site. Like when you're on site, the last thing you want to do is pick up education. The last thing you want to do is attend an event. You're like knackered. So I took myself away from the labor and basically became a finger, I call them finger pointers, where you get paid from the shoulders up and you're not physically doing it. And we managed that site from inception to completion for the client Ukes Net-a-Porter, so the fashion brand. And there was days where there was 350 men on site and there was all sorts going on. But what that allowed me to do is educate myself and understand exactly what I wanted to do. And in that year, I did a lot of textbook work, homework, because I wasn't physically working. I was managing that project. So after successfully doing that, I was like eager. I understood what I wanted to do. I was joined to a few groups, and Ben and I actually shared the same mentor, which was a guy called Mark Doyle, who said to me and Ben independently, you guys should link up. And the main reason he said was because we're a similar age group. We had similar ambitions. I think we both have similar personable sort of attributes, both quite easygoing, both like a bit of fun. And Ben had a project in Reading that was going through planning. And Ben was also planning on going traveling for a year with his wife-to-be or fiance at the time, I believe. And I live in Reading. So Mark said, you guys should meet up, because if Ben's away, Jack can look after stuff. But even so, I think you should connect up. So Ben and I met for a coffee. We got on well. It wasn't like love at first sight. I didn't think we would be business partners, a year later. But we did get on really well. So from then, I just sort of looked at Ben as a bit like, I called him an architect for the first year I knew him. I thought he was an architect. And every time he would correct me and be like, I'm not actually a qualified architect. I'm an architectural engineer who owns his own architectural practice. I was like, all right, okay.
Different.
Yeah, huge difference. But anyway, we kept in touch. I believe he went traveling and he got planning permission on that Reading scheme, which we might talk about a bit later on. You'll have to excuse, like the sun's going up and down in my office, so I go dark and then light. But anyway,
it's all good.
So Ben and I stayed in contact. I knew he was keen to be a property developer, but at that point he was sort of starting up his architectural practice and really getting into the nitty-gritty of running that business day to day. I just started sending like sites to him and being like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Because I had quite a good eye for a deal, I suppose, because there wasn't any confusion for me. I understood build costs and I didn't understand planning. So I just avoided stuff that was really like heavily planning influenced, and I could value sites at that moment in time. That's one thing I was fortunate. I could always value a site. I know a lot of people need help and expertise to do that. And I try and offer people that are around me that assistance, because I was fortunate that I knew the build costs. I'd signed off a site's worth of bricks 3 months before I was valuing a site that's up the road. So that came quite naturally to me. So I'd send sites to him, do a packet stack, and we'd sort of back and forth it together. And it became quite evident that there was good synergy there. And originally we both had done a profile test and we came up with the same profile, and we were like, are we the same person?
Was that like a wealth dynamics one? Or
yeah. So it's wealth dynamics. So I'm a creator mechanic. So I'm quite creative, but I like my numbers. And Ben was exactly the same. I think he had a bit of star in him, which you can see. He loves a bit of loves a bit of what do you call it? Showcasing. But anyway,
he likes some screen time. We'll have to get him on Property People at some point as well.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have a very interesting chat with him. But he loves the limelight. So we did the personality test, and we didn't necessarily go, right, let's build a £10 million revenue development business. We didn't sit down and ever have that chat. We just started getting offers out and stuff, and knowing that we could be partners on a deal, and if that works, we could then be indefinite development partners. And quite comically, more and more came out of the woodwork of what we realized we were best at. And we have a massive methodology, which I see a lot of development partners in our industry not do this. And it kills me because I see the power of it, which is divide and conquering. I see all the time 2 buddies joint venture, right? They joint venture and then they follow each other everywhere. And it's like a guy in his shadow, and then they swap, and then it's a guy in a shadow. And I'm like, how are you adding value to your business if you're just following each other?
Totally
like,
agree.
okay, you will incrementally sort of turn a screw when there's 2 heads together at that same time. But Ben and I are massively like, I'm bringing a deal in, I'm structuring it, I'm funding it, I'm creating the deal, I've got the stack, I've got the bank in line, I've got the investor in line.
Yeah.
And then I give Ben the key and he gets the planning and delivers it. And that's it. Like, I almost don't know what's going on most of the time. Like, I showed my parents around our bigger scheme yesterday. And my dad was like, where'd you get that from? I was like, fuck knows. I was like, I don't know.
It's really, really important. I agree. You know, having 2 clearly defined roles in any organization, because otherwise you're following around each other doing the same things, and there's plenty of things to be done. And if both of you are doing the same thing, how are the other things getting done? And then if you know, I think one of the attractions to watching you guys grow has been exactly that, knowing that you're the more focused on the front end, the acquisitions and finding the funding, so structuring the deal, and then him at the back end, making sure that you can engineer and add value to that deal through the planning process and then deliver it. I think has been really, really instrumental in getting you to the growth that you've seen.
Yeah, no, completely agree. So it then came to a point where we were getting offers out, quite a few. You know, we probably had at least a dozen offers out, prerequisites. We secured the first project, and then we secured our first project in July 2018. We set up the company EXP. There wasn't huge thought process behind this is going to be our indefinite business. That's a huge partnership, but it did transpire into that. So the first scheme we secured is still today our biggest, which is crazy. So we bought a site, a mixed use site, for 780 grand. And at the time it was 4 industrial storage units, 7 small offices and 4 studio flats. And that whole site was in just south of Reading, just off the M4 in Spencer's Wood. And we bought that site and completed on it the following March. It took quite a while because it was a administration sale. And in that time, we had done so much more in our business since we set it up and got to the point we were sort of buying that site in March.
Very, very good. And in terms of your favorite type of creative deal, because I know that you're also doing creative stuff, assisted sales. I mean, you've got one, if you're watching this on YouTube, hopefully you'll see that Jack's got this scheme behind him. Talk us through that one, actually.
This is, we didn't actually build this one out. This was a site that we bought, got planning and flipped. Which we may talk about how we manage what we build and what we don't build in our business. But anyway, so this site behind us is actually an ex-police station. So this office here used to be a police office. Right. I actually went to primary school behind this site. And this side here, the middle house, which you can see here, is a 3-bedroom house, which was existing, obviously pretty dilapidated and ugly. And it actually had a leak in the loft. So it was a very dilapidated site. So the site came on the market. It came on the market, I think, in sort of November 2019. I looked at it, knew the site extremely well, knew the area was pretty buoyant. There's a good catchment for this. So there's 2 schools in this town, a preschool and a senior school. So there's huge catchment for anyone that's developing houses knows that you want to be in a catchment for a school area if you're building starter family homes. So we viewed the site. It went on with a semi-national commercial outfit. We put an offer in. It was sealed bids. Didn't have a relationship with the agent. We weren't successful. And in actual fact, the seller, which was the police force, didn't believe they got the value that they thought the site was worth. 3 months later, it came on with a local agent who I've bought and sold through many a times, pre-EXP and also looked at stuff with EXP. We put forward the same offer minus, I think we dropped 5% off it, because we had a bit more of an insight of the bidding process, which is key. And we also, we're not always just going to put our offer up and up and up. You know, there's at that moment in time, the market, you know, Brexit was coming about, it was wobbling a bit, and I was like, well, why should we go in at the same figure? So anyway, we dropped our value by about 5%, and we secured the site unconditionally. We bought it with bridging finance. The reason that we could get funding on a police station was because of the house and the station. We valued it. If we split the site, we basically told the surveyor, right, if we split the site and sold the house as a house and the office as an office, it's a police station, but it's really an office. The whole site was sui generis planning permission. So we needed to change that to C3 and B1. But we said, if we split the site, and technically we don't really need planning for that, because if you split the site, you're not going to say that house is sui generis planning, because it's a 3-bedroom family home.
Correct.
What is the site worth? And that's how we were enabled to buy the site. So we bought the site with loan investment from an investment company, with bridging finance, secured planning to build 2 new houses and extend the office. So we took the site value. So we bought for 460 and we sold for just shy of 600K within the space of, once we had bought the site, we had planning in 5 months. So it was quite a quick turnaround. And we decided just to flip this site on and sell with planning.
Well, you mentioned that you can go into that a little bit. How do you determine whether you're going to buy, are you going to hang on to something and build it out, or whether you want to just flip it with the planning? How do you go about that decision making process?
Yeah, cool. So if Ben and I were one-man band, so i.e. me and Ben, we wouldn't have as much overheads as we do now. So it's probably less important to flip sites with planning, because you've always got to feed that pipeline. And we always take a view that if you have a good pipeline, so if your pipeline of deals is strong, why not sell stock on with planning gain? And the reason that we do that is because we're not always going to be the cheapest builder. So the way that we tend to build is we get a formal JCT contract. The contractor technically PMs the job, we PM them. So we're not on site, we're not managing trades, so we're not going to be able to build the cheapest. So what you can sometimes do, and this isn't in every event, you can sometimes sell a site with planning and have some of the build profit brought forward because that person's building it cheaper. And what I mean by that is, when you're a developer and you get planning on a site and you decide to build it out, at that moment in time, you're crystallizing the value of that site. And quite commonly, you could sell it for more to someone else that could build cheaper, because that 5% they're building cheaper, or that 5% profit margin they're not looking for, you just sell the site for 5% more. So we do like to keep that sort of churn going, as it were. And at this moment in time, we had a ridiculous pipeline, like 6 deals in legals. And I was like to Ben, I was like, I think we should just flip this, because we're not going to. We've done the planning, so we're not going to improve the planning between now and delivery. So let's just offload this and move on to other stuff.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. If you think that you've squeezed enough juice out, you've got a strong enough pipeline, and you can deploy resources elsewhere. And if construction is not your main staple of income, there are other, as you say, builders that will do those kinds of projects at skinnier margins, but robust enough margins for themselves, because they can control that value chain a lot better. So that does make sense. And then in terms of, I mean, this was pretty much a straight up bridging deal. You found it. In terms of joint venturing and assisted sales and those kinds of things, because I know that you've been accustomed to that kind of structure as well. Because what's your favorite deal in that?
So I love assisted sales. I think that they are, I suppose, one of our unique elements that we're delivering. So the property industry, and everyone knows, is extremely traditional and extremely dated. There's not enough tech in there. There's not enough systems. There's not enough. If you set up a business that's in, selling a product, you could be the biggest business within your market within 3 to 5 years. That's never going to happen in property. It's never. It's just such a traditional, well-nourished industry that looks down on new people coming in, and it's all about your reputation. It's all about your prerequisite experience. It's all about how many developments you've done before, and that trickles through commercial agents, banks, all of the above. So we love assisted sales because it gave EXP the opportunity to have some fun with a bit of creativity.
Yeah.
And it didn't actually, no one actually ever said to me, right, I'm going to tell you a strategy that you can deliver very easily off the back of one contract, and it's easier to do than a development. No one ever said that to us. We sort of found the assisted sale, if that makes sense, which was the first assisted sale we did, which we've completed now, and we've sold one of the 2 units, and well, we've technically sold 2 of them, but one of them still in legals. Was really long and short. It took quite a while to get over the line, and hence why we've only just completed it. But the seller was looking to sell a 5-bedroom property that used to be a semi-detached house. They then built this. I'm going back like 30 years ago. They then built a 2-bay garage. They then built above the 2-bay garage, and it then became a 5-bedroom semi-detached house.
So like double fronted almost.
Correct, yeah, which would quite naturally just be split down the middle, and then you'd have a terrace and the sort of existing end of terrace. So classic like end of terrace build. The vendor knew this, so once the scheme had been developed out, I believe he had bought it once it was fully sort of built all the way out. He then got planning permission to split it into 2 3-bedroom houses. So At the moment when EXP found this deal, he had already done all the planning and done all the hard work. We saw it, we actually got introduced to the deal by someone that we met via networking within the property industry, a good friend of mine. And at the point we sort of got engrossed and started looking at the deal, it was going into auction and we were looking at buying it. So we looked at this deal. It was to sort of run through the numbers and how an assisted sale works is we walked towards this deal thinking we're going to buy this deal, we're going to develop it out, we're going to be happy, we're going to walk away. We looked at the numbers and the seller wanted 450 for the site. The two houses at the back end would be worth early 300s. So let's just round that down, worst case is 600k. The SDLT for a investment company to buy that asset would be about, I think it's about 32 grand.
Yeah.
So if you bought for 450 and your legals are about 32k, your SDLT is 32k, and then you have legals and banking fees and initiating, all your associated costs to get that site within your ownership, you're going to be in for 500 grand. 100 grand needs to be spent to deliver the scheme. So you're now at a point where you're breaking even. So technically speaking, you could argue that this house is probably more valuable as a 5-bed house because the numbers don't stack up. So what we propose to do with the seller is we agree a lower price that we lock in. We call it like a lock-in value for the property. So we agreed 420. We don't buy the site. We don't pay SDLT. We get one joint venture contract, which I think costs us 1,600 quid between both parties to agree, which is basically like a joint venture agreement. But it's, if you sort of pull it away, it's an assisted sale joint venture agreement where they still own the asset. They still have the right to their 420. That's what they put in. And we bring everything else. And when you look at the numbers in that instance, so 420 plus 100k of build is 520. And then you've technically, if you sell it for 600k minus sales cost, you could be up to making 80k, which is quite simple for a conversion to 2 3-bed houses. So the joint venture agreement was agreed. This was going back October last year. Spade in the ground was 3rd week of October. We finished the site within under 4 months. We had sold them within a month. And all of a sudden, we've created a deal that doesn't work to just a nice income for both us and the seller. What the seller achieves is 50% of the sales. So if we assume that's 40k, they would walk away with 420 plus 40. So they'll walk away with 460. So an asset they couldn't sell at 450, they've now got 10 grand more and they haven't lifted a finger. And we walk away with 50% of that profit as well. Now, we did sell the assets for 50k more than we put in our conservative figures. So we actually grossed, I think, 650 for the two. It might actually be 660, which is obviously where we make decent money on that site. But for the sake of 4.5 months work, it's a good deal. It works for us. It works for the seller. And there's a few wins that we've had out of this one, which I'll share with everyone so they can see the benefit of assisted sale. So it's not only the fact that you don't have to do the conveyancing, you don't have to deal with banks, although we do like working with lenders. It's just a lot quicker and easier. So within a month, you could have a new deal. It's one joint venture contract. Everyone knows what it takes to do a joint venture contract. So when we buy a site with an investor and we have one joint venture contract with that investor, and then we also have the other 6 contracts that we've got, the debenture, the charge, the bank's part, the deed of priority. It's just one agreement done. You're in, you're on site, exactly. You're cracking on. So that's one win that you have, the speed and the change of pace. Another one is the de-risking of the project. So if you have 6 other developments going on that you all own and they're your sites, you're PGing that, and you've got a bank that's got a charge on it, and something changes, that's fairly risky business. Not necessarily if you know what you're doing, but just looking from a holistic perspective. If you've got a little assisted sale going along, it sort of de-risks the portfolio to some degree, and you're countering your I suppose your income. You're not doing a big sort of all resources in, this is our site, we're PGing the equity, we're PGing the senior debt. It's just like a little cheeky deal that you can do on the side. So that's benefit number 2. And benefit number 3 is when you've performed, and let's hope you do, and you sell that site, we've now got a vendor that's got 420 grand in his pocket, plus an additional 60, 70 grand in his pocket. So 500k sat there. They might be looking to reinvest that into property, and they might happen to know someone that they could do that with. So that's the third benefit and why we love assisted sales. And when we offered that to this vendor, we didn't have a clue what an assisted sale was. We sort of stumbled on it, and it worked. And it's a nice way of changing your revenue streams to something that's slightly less risky, a bit more cohesive with a person rather than loads of professional outfits, i.e. another investor, another bank. It's just a change of pace, which is quite nice. And now we've got a 8-unit scheme in Canterbury and Kent, which is an assisted sale. We've got a 9-unit scheme in South Oxfordshire, which is a assisted sale, and then we've got another 9-unit scheme in Buckinghamshire of flats that's an assisted sale. And all 4, we don't own the site. We just deliver it. We deliver the planning and the build, and then we split the profit, and we bring whatever we need to bring to the table.
Very, very interesting. So for £100,000 for the build, you're on a 600,000 valuation, you were going to make about 40,000, which is a great return on investment. And you come up with the 100,000. Is that correct? That's pretty much all the cash that you bring in, and then you just manage the project through to completion.
Yeah. So we had, at the moment in time we were looking to deliver that scheme, we didn't have 100 grand in our bank account. So we actually agreed to bring in third-party finance, and the venture would pay the third-party finance a return on their capital. So Again, it was technically from EXP's perspective, we put in 1,600 quid for the JV agreement, and that was it. But this is where this deal gets quite fun. We shared with the vendor that we were looking to get external finance in, and he was like, cool, that works for us as long as we can deliver it. And come the point that we actually went to deliver it, he said, look, I've got that money, let's do it with my cash. So we agreed a coupon for him to be the investor on his own scheme. So technically speaking, this guy, other than the delivery of it, had everything. He had the house, he had the planning, he had the money, but he needed EXP, which we're forever grateful for. And we've built a really good relationship with the vendor, and hopefully that continues, because I think we've taken a duck to water on this particular scheme, and we've delivered it promptly and well, and got ceiling values for that road. So hopefully that goes again. But in this instance, the third-party finance was from the property owner as well.
Something that comes to mind, though, in terms of risks with that kind of thing, that it'd be interesting to know how, I guess the relationship is important, but what happens if you have suddenly a greedy vendor and he thinks, right, I'm sitting on a house that's worth 600,000 and I want it all for myself, or even 650 as it ended up being. So how do you mitigate that? Do you put a restriction on the title so he can't do anything with it until you guys allow him, or?
Yes. So if allowed, we put a charge on the site, warranting our fee. In this particular instance, we had because he had a buy-to-let mortgage, we had to get a new lender in that was flexible with works commencing while there was a charge on the asset. not every buy-to-let mortgage. I know there's some people out there that do it without telling the mortgage company, but we wanted to be clean on that. So we had to change mortgage companies, and yes, we couldn't get a charge on the asset. So we did agree a restriction on title. And the joint venture agreement covers us from a legal and monetary value, and the restriction covers us from a logistics perspective. So in that instance, we had a restriction. I would push for a charge if you can. If you start talking about a restriction first, you're not going to get a charge. Start with a charge and then fall back to a restriction.
Okay, very good. These assisted sales, and you've got more on the go at I mean, they do totally make sense. It is almost like a joint venture with the landowner.
It's exactly that. What you are doing is, for the sake of a contract, they are staying as an investor. So I call it, so you mentioned risk, and you mentioned if you get a greedy vendor, and then you also mention it's a JV with the landowner. There's a few things that I say to Saul. So Saul joined our EXP team, and he's resourcing schemes inside the M25. And I always say to him, try and buy it, because otherwise you're inheriting a partner that you don't know how they perform and what they're like. True. Sometimes they're emotionally invested, sometimes they don't care. And I can normally get a fairly good flavour of people that I'd like to work with, because funnily enough, EXP have got like a stereotype of investor. But I can get a fairly quick flavour. And I say to Saul all the time, we don't want to inherit a investor that we don't know how they work or operate. We want to sort of go through that process first. But if the deal does not work any other way, I'd rather do an assisted sale than anything else. So that's like our fallback offer. So we always offer unconditionally or subjectto. And then as a fallback, we go then back to assisted sale, because it normally means that we can pay a bit more for the site. So we don't want to inherit a relationship that we don't know how that is, but it technically is, yes. What you're doing is, rather than paying all those purchase costs and all the SDLT fees, you're replacing those costs with one joint venture agreement and delivering the scheme with the vendor. There's two really important things that you have to acknowledge with an assisted sale. One, you can work with them, and two, they're prepared to take on the risk, because most people that are offloading sites don't have the risk appetite that you and I or the listeners will have. You have to understand that, for example, we've offered on a mixed-use building in Marlow in Buckinghamshire, which was looking like we were going to do an assisted sale. But the guy that owned the building, he's just had to relocate his business from an office to a working from home environment. He's not prepared to take on a £2 million deal with me. And we've never worked together. So I get that. So we're now actually going down the route where we're going to be buying the site off him. But you have to understand that as well.
As long as you've got these different tools in your toolkit to be able to go to the negotiating table, and you start in a certain place and you end up somewhere, and through that process of the relationships building anyway, because you're having multiple touch points with the landowner, you might get a deal out of it, rather than just saying, I'll buy it, yes, no, and then walk away into the next one. I think it's being resourceful by having these different strategies in mind. And when you're looking at a deal, what is the most important metric that you and Ben consider? Is it things like profit on cost, profit on GDV, or is it things like, the return on your own equity? The deal in the assisted sale you mentioned, the return on equity there is phenomenal. Is that the most important thing, or is it more to do with the project focus?
Yeah, so we don't tend to focus on return on equity, because we never know what equity we're going to have in our business when we're doing that scheme. So I suppose the two most important things we look at in a scheme, and it's been this way since day one, really. One, we have our worst case scenario, and that's what we start with. And our worst case scenario is providing that we don't get the planning permission that we need, we don't get the change of use, we don't manage to convince the neighbouring property to sell us their garden. So our worst case is all of the variables just completely squashed and not even on that stack. So our worst case is if we buy the site. In this instance, let's use this police station as an example I mentioned. We bought the site for 460. We split the site down the middle, so we got 3-bed house and an office. The office is worth 150 all day long, and the house is worth 450 all day long. We've now got a site worth 600k. If we deduct the sales costs off that, which assume it's 10k, including agents' fees and sales costs, we bought for 460. We failed at getting planning, and we've sold it and we still made 100K. That's our worst case. So that's our one most important factor, because that's what sells the deal to whoever you're doing it with. Whether you're doing it internally or externally, we want to know that we can cover our costs and cover our tracks and probably make a bit of money in most instances.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you were looking at a deal where the upside looks so great, subject to,
Yeah.
But you could break even at least on a worst case scenario, you still might go for it just to see, okay, if we can get any of that upside in.
Exactly. So that's our first and foremost most important metric. So the what can we do now without anyone having to give us approval, consent, funding, agreements, overages? What can we do now to deliver the scheme on the purchase price and on the exit value without any variables? So that's the most important one. So like our worst case, and that is actually called on our spreadsheet, number 1, worst case. And then we'll have like 7 other tabs where we're like option A, option B, option C, option D, and that is your bonus. That is what your profit is going to be. So that's our first and foremost most important thing. Then once we've done our worst case and all of the other options, our second most important thing is we have a box on our spreadsheet which calculates if our costs increase by 10%, our GDV decreases by 10%, and the project overruns by 6 months, what happens? So if our worst case is X, for an example, and if we put it through that box calculation, if the costs go up 10%, the GDV comes down 10%, and the project overruns by 6 months, and it still makes a profit, we're good. And then the 2 most important things. So we're more interested in saving the downside than getting an upside. And when you see a lot of people in our industry always, fixated on the end values that it could be, they're always setting themselves up for, knockbacks and planning not actually going their way. And of course, you're not going to get 40 flats on a 1 acre site. We come with a bit more of a realistic approach, and we're more interested in building a reputation than building a profit next year. And that's the way that we focus all of our deals. And we would quite happily do 5 deals that don't make a profit, but we build a really good relationship with a lender and an investor, proving that our model works. So we say we failed planning, but we had this in our numbers, and this is what we actually made, and you walk away with X. And they're like, you were correct. You've been transparent. We've acknowledged the failures, but we're rolling everything into next year. I think it's more about how you do the process than that one scheme. Anyone can be massively profitable off one scheme, and it's sometimes hard to watch as an external. They I looked at their stack, their numbers were way off, and they made 60% return on what they bought it for, but they won't do that again because they haven't learned from it.
And it's a very interesting methodology to stress testing. I think it's a very sensible way of doing it to cover your downside. And as you say, with focusing on your reputation, the longevity in the business is a much better way of progressing forward. So one of the final things that I wanted to discuss with you was funding, because I know that that's what you run around the market, making sure that you can get your hands on cash to do all these deals in one way or another. And you went down the crowdfunding route on, is it one occasion or a couple of occasions?
Just one occasion to date, yes.
And how did that go for you?
Yeah, really, really good. Weirdly, we had, I think by the time that we were crowdfunding this deal, we had 3 or 4 deals on the go, and every single one of them was equity funded and senior debt. So in my opinion, you could argue that that's probably the more traditional way that developers go about funding deals, and also, in my opinion, the riskiest way of doing it. So we wanted a change of pace. We were like, let's try mixing it up and not work with a specific bank that has an underwriter and a limit and has a criteria where you go, oh, sorry, it doesn't fit our criteria, we can't work with you. So we wanted to try something a bit different. We also knew that our profiles at that time weren't as good as they could be. We're young, we wanted to get our name out there, and we found that finding equity investment was particularly difficult because our standard deal looks for investment between sort of 250 and 400K. That's like our sort of bread and butter type deal. And it's very, very, very difficult to work with people on that basis the first time round. And we know that we can't, as a business, keep doing 100k, 50k deals because one, they take just as long. Two, they cost just as much in legals. And three, we're going to have to do 10 of them to do the equivalent of three deals the size that we want to be doing. So we acknowledge that a good way to start a relationship with people would be crowdfunding, because you might have a relationship with 350 investors, and whether they invest 50 quid, 30k, 50k, they may be more interested they're not going to invest less if you're good. They normally invest more. So we acknowledge that it would be a change of pace against banks. We acknowledge that it would be good for our profiles. And three, it would be a good way of meeting people for a first time round and giving them a flavour of what we do, to then hopefully build a more flourishing relationship. At that moment in time, our project, we had about double the value in planning gain to what we bought it for. So we could have easily got funding without putting any capital in, and it would have been cheaper than the crowd. But again, like I say, we're not interested in what profit we make next year. We're more interested in building a business. So that's the reason that we went into crowdfunding. And it was pretty straightforward, to be fair. The platform that we use were great. They're very personable. They're more of a startup than the bigger companies that are corporates backed by pension funds. There's a few companies that come to mind that I would argue that aren't really crowdfunding anymore. We see crowdfunding as peer-to-peer, not where you put something up and a group fund it. Because I've acknowledged there's a few crowdfunding platforms where when a deal goes up, it's funded within 2 seconds, and that's because a pension lender just goes bang, I'm in, and that's not peer-to-peer to us. We probably wouldn't ever do that, because we'd rather just go to a lender. So we went for more of a startup firm which has peer-to-peer lending, and it was great. And there are investors there interested that we have to give them monthly updates, and that you can engage with. We did, because we bought the site in January, we actually did mince pies and mulled wine on site, and it was that's what we wanted. It funded within, I think it actually took a fair while to fund the deal, and that didn't bother us, because we bought the site for 90k and our build cost was about 210. So our total raise was just below, I think it was 320 to 350, something along those lines. And it didn't bother us that we didn't get the full raise within a few weeks, because we'd already started the build. So because people were chipping in later and later, we weren't paying.
It didn't hold you up, basically.
So we were already on site. We already bought the site. We were already on site, cracking on, and it was just sort of incrementally going up. But we were the first charge deal on that platform, so we were the lowest percentage return. So you could argue we've gone to a group of investors that are used to the teens and the high teens and some early 20s deals.
So you've been making the market for that little marketplace.
Yes, yeah. So we were breaking the mold a bit in that particular platform.
Would you? The question is, would you go down the crowdfunding platform again, or would you stick to your traditional high net worth family offices, institutions, just for that snappier, quicker decision making?
For me, it all depends on the deal. That particular deal, I probably would go crowdfunding again. It's probably about 3-4% of cost of capital more expensive than what we can get elsewhere. Right. And for the relationships that you get out of it, and from the exposure you get out of it, and we can't ignore that crowdfunding has a buzz to it. I've got family in America, and a friend of a friend is setting up a brewery, and he called me the other day, like, you've been through crowdfunding, what's it like? And I was like, it's got that buzz, and people that don't relate to property can relate to crowdfunding. So it's fun. It's a little bit more costly, but I think it's worth it. And I think that reward outweighs that cost. But that's not to say that we wouldn't ever fund 100% of our deals through crowdfunding. It just wouldn't work. We wouldn't be able to sustain the business on that. It would be too much time. It would cost too much. It would whip a lot of margin out of the bigger deals. And we do now have good relationships with institutions and family offices and investors. So we don't, we're making a conscious choice of when it's the right deal. We will continue to do crowdfunding, but when those deals come up, we'll then go, right, this one works. It's similar to, like you say, people come to me and say, how do I do an assisted sale? And I was like, well, bring me a deal and I'll tell you whether it's worthwhile doing this to sell or not. I was like, it's not something that you walk into the estate agent, they go, here's an assisted sale for you, sir. It's the same with crowdfunding. No one comes to you and goes, this will work best with crowdfunding. You need to make that decision for you and your business at that time. And we will continue to do crowdfunding.
I've got a long list of a lot more questions, and I'm just conscientious we're short on time. Quickly, in terms of market opportunities with where we're at right now, in the next 6 to 18 months, where are the market opportunities?
So I think anyone sensible in our business right now is selling sites, selling stuff with planning, and selling their sales stock as soon as we can before the June deadline. The market in the last few years hasn't seen the heat that we've got right now. We've sold 2 sites this year where we've bought them last year in a you could argue very volatile market, back when no one knew what this virus was going to be doing to the world, let alone the property market. And we've sold both those sites on this year when there's more certainty for quite a substantial margin. One of them a 35% margin, and we've done nothing to the site. So wow. I think it's currently a really good time to be selling stock. We're recording this, for those that don't know, on April 16th. So you've got to be pretty quick to be now turning around and selling a site. So we're selling stock. So we're selling our 2 flats in Reading, our 2 units in Basingstoke. We're selling sites. We've got 2 sites we sold in auctions, 1 site we sold outside of an auction, and we're probably going to put 3 more sites in auctions between now and summer.
Nice.
So you could argue we're selling everything. But we're doing that because we're not building a business on riding the market. We're building a business on adding value in developments. But when those opportunities present themselves, you can utilize them. If you've got a deal flow of 4 deals in delivery, 3 in legals and 3 post delivery, why not explore that? So work hard on selling at the beginning half, the first half of this year is my view. And then start going hunting later on in the year when there's a bit more distress in the market. I think there's going to be a few businesses that are struggling because we can't ignore, and I do feel for retail and hospitality, but they're probably going to be struggling quite a lot.
From a business point of view, you're building up a big war chest. If you're selling everything, you're going to be sitting on a lot of cash, liquidity, equity that you're going to be able to plow into future deals and compound that. So that does make sense that you're going to be taking those steps. Now, in terms of, you're clearly property people. What does it take to be a successful property person?
Good question. This question is actually, like one of my pet peeves, because I hear people respond and I'm like, I just don't agree with that. I think property is the same as any other industry. And one thing that I've heard a few people say, and I really resonate with, it's like any other business. You can't be the best property developer in 12 months, 18 months, 3 years. You're always learning. And you need to treat it a bit more like every other business. You need to earn your, respect and reputation is earned. It's not done in one deal. And the hardest thing with property is to continue doing good deals. And your first one is always the hardest and always the biggest learning curve. So I've mentioned at the beginning of this call, I've always been a hard worker, and I've eventually started to become what I would, in my opinion, say a hard and smart investor or worker. So just put the time in. So it's not rocket science. It's accessible to everyone. Put the time in. I hear all the time, start small, and I completely agree. If you're not starting small, you're going to come across issues with funding, people lending to it. Where's your historic? Show me your property CV. What have you done before? So you're only going to make your life harder if you try and scale too quickly, and also I think riskier. But just put the time in, and you've got all access to learning. It's really easy to partner with people. So I mentioned earlier that if you set up a tech business, you could be the leading tech company within your industry for 3 to 5 years, but you don't have the opportunity to segregate projects into different ring-fenced like arenas. you normally it's one gig and that's it, and you have one shot and you can't protect yourself against other things that you're doing. So property offers a really, really strong multiple streams or multiple risks or multiple ventures. So to give you an example, I run 3 property businesses: EXP, a HMO business which is called Central Suites, and then a family orientated land speculation and commercial building business which is called Jiggens Property. And I can sort of switch the tap on and off on any of them and take more risk or less risk or deviate risk or pay down debt, and sort of circulate that in all 3 of them and can control that. So it's almost like having 3 completely different businesses. Then if we dial down into EXP, we've got 4 different businesses running 4 different developments. So
yeah,
for me, it's you can have a lot of control over property, and it's a phenomenal asset class to be in for business and also investment. So I love it. I cannot believe that everyone isn't doing it. Like you're like, there's a business where capital appreciation helps you. You're doing no harm understanding more about the property market, because pretty much everyone in this country buys a property at some point. And if you buy well on your property, you sometimes outweigh your career. So yeah. There's no downside. But yeah, just stick to it, work hard, network with people, look to other people for help. I've had some amazing mentors in my time, and it helps because...
You mentioned Mark Doyle. How did you go about choosing him? Like, why him? And there's so many others.
Yeah, so regrettably, it was no, not regrettably. It was both Ben and I were part of the Progressive network. And it wasn't my sole, what would I call it, sole association or my sole learnings. It was something I did as well as other things. I had another mentor outside Progressive, but at Progressive, on the VIP course, you have a selection of a multiple amount of mentors. And I'm a pretty family orientated person. So for me, a good mentor is someone that has your best interests at heart. Yeah. And Mark does. So I really resonated with Mark. We got on really well. We cared more about our lives than the deal, if that makes sense. So you can get mentors that are all specialise in finance, and they all care about knocking that arrangement fee down from 1.7% to 1.25%. But Mark was saying, what do you actually want to get from this? What's the long-term plan? So that's how I chose Mark. I kissed a few frogs in that room. But,
as you do. Listen, Jack, it's been absolute pleasure, as it always is, spending time with you. You've been incredibly insightful, open and honest about numbers. And I think a lot of people are going to find huge value, as they always do when they spend time with you. So thank you very much again. How can people find you and reach out to you if they want to, find out more? Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Sam. And I wish we could have talked more about you as well, because I know you're working on exciting stuff too. Find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, Jack Jiggens, and you can just message me on there. I'm a pretty cohesive person. Like, I like to help and talk to people, and I believe that even if I need to run a deal stack for you and give you some value or help you with something, that eventually there might be something that comes back round, even if it's just a recommendation or an introduction. So I've always been pretty open with communicating with people. So anyone out there, bear that in mind. Sweet. We're going to keep all of your contact details and websites, etc., in the show notes. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for tuning in today. We've got lots more super active property people coming up, so keep up to date. Click the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, leave us a comment, share us and find us across social media, and we'll see you next time.